Good afternoon, and thank you all for being here. When I initially submitted Nicole as a potential visiting artist, it was before last year's election really unfolded. Before this most recent wave of attacks on how we can talk about race, gender, and culture in our classrooms. A year later, we're feeling the weight of that shift. We often say that we want to lift up underrepresented voices. Moments like this remind me that it's not just about lifting them up, it's about turning to those voices for direction. In the last year, we've watched something else unfold, not always through open public debate, but through executive actions that use fear and funding as leverage. Federal agencies have been pushed to pull support from schools that acknowledge gender identity. Policies have been rewritten to redefine sex as a fixed binary. Grants have been threatened. Protections rolled back. And entire areas of studied label ideological, simply for talking about lived experiences. This is not a neutral shift. These pressures create an environment where institutions retreat, where administrators grow cautious, where whole fields of knowledge are pushed back into the shadows, not because they lack value, but because someone with power decided they're inconvenient. And we're seeing this very clearly in places like Texas A&M College Station, which just last week on November 13th retreated from academic freedom by rolling out new policies that restrict how race, gender, and cultural identity can even be discussed in their public universities, including across all 12 institutions in the A&M system. That's a system I myself graduated from 20 years ago. It's a system I stand up to challenge so that students in Texas, just like mine here, are not erased or silenced. In moments like this, it becomes even more important, essential really, to turn towards artists and educators whose work refuses erasure, whose work reminds students that the fullness of who they are is not an ideology. Nicole's practice does exactly that. Their work holds space for history, community, struggle, and joy all at once, and insists those stories belong in our classrooms, our institutions, and our imaginations. So on behalf of the art department and the College of DuPage, I genuinely am honored to welcome Nicole Marroquin. Please join me in giving Nicole a very warm COD welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the warm welcome. I'm going to set a timer to be transparent. It's going to go off when I have 2 minutes. First of all, I am thrilled to be back in the Chicagoland area. I've been in Ann Arbor for about 3 years now and had been in Chicago and teaching in Chicago and doing work on Chicago history before that, about 15 years. And I want to tell you a little bit about me. I'm originally from South Texas, and my parents moved up north when I was a little kid in order for them to go. My dad got into graduate school at University of Michigan, and I'm the mother of 2 kind of incredible human beings. And everything I'm going to show you today is collaborative work. None of the work did I do independently. I work with artists, I work with youth, I work with teachers. I've recently started interviewing elders, and I also love working with comrades outside of the institutions that I'm working in. I do print, I do sculpture, but it's all stemming from research And then, of course, the production of the work, and then the dissemination of the work, which is a couple of different forms. But like I said, I tend to be sort of focused on ceramics and print. But one of my early interests is youth rebellion, and that's me rebelling. I was a handful. I was a difficult young person, and I went to a radical leftist school called Community High, I think it is the first open high school in the country. I went to the first open elementary school in the country, very youth-directed, and I found out later that I was growing up in this environment where this youth liberation organization had also been, and I've thought a lot about what it means to be a rebel youth, and then to be working with young people and thinking about their institutional critique and rebellion and what that means and how we can think about this in another way, in a productive way. This picture I got off eBay. There's so many interesting histories that are not actually taught to young people. And I was working in teacher education for about 15 years at the Art Institute of Chicago, at the School of the Art Institute. And I started finding all these really sort of productive areas to do my work within youth rebellion and student uprisings. But I was also, somebody who had a really iffy relationship with schooling. I liked learning, but schooling in itself was the difficulty. I was the skeptic. I found this picture on eBay too, by the way. It's of Ogden Elementary, 1954 kindergarten air raid practice, not unlike the practices we put young people through now, but I was really not going along with the game plan in schools. I was the one where there was a sub and you could count on me getting in trouble. But I was also thinking, if I look back on it, like, why do I have to learn this? What's worthy of study? How is knowledge produced and by whom? And over time, I started to be able to contextualize this. Dr. Marroquin VAS says, on the politics of history, historical meaning making and practices that shape collective memory, from her essay, Invisibility is an Unnatural Disaster, Feminist Archival Praxis and the Digital Turn. She's talking about how access to power determines one's presence in the archive, and consequently, certain people's lives and interventions are rarely the subject of historical meaning making. She's talking about this cycle that happens, right, where archives don't collect certain histories, and then historians don't write about it. But if historians aren't writing about it, the archives won't collect it, right? So you can see the problem, or one of the problems. And so invisibility as an unnatural disaster is sort of this theme that I've been working from. This is a map I found in a pile of, 1960s material about Mexican Americans, and it said that there were basically none in Illinois and Michigan. I grew up in Michigan. Illinois, I don't know, it's like a pretty Mexican place. And so it just got me thinking. And also, when I was a public school teacher in the city of Chicago, I thought, where is this curriculum that I would be teaching to these students, right? We didn't spring up out of a crack in the sidewalk. We've been here for a while. And in teacher education, I started to seek out the texts where people were teaching against the grain, right? Student rebellions very often, especially starting in about 1963 in Chicago, were very focused on the fight for ethnic studies. This incredible book, if you ever get a chance to look at it, Fugitive Pedagogies, Carter G. Woodson and the Art of Black Teaching, is incredible. In fact, like, the picture is taken of this era where people weren't allowed to teach about Black history. In fact, people were told there was no Black history. And then teachers would be teaching about it, and then somebody would come in to observe them, and they would hide the book that they were teaching from, or hide the notes or the pictures. So it was fugitive pedagogies. I'm also very interested in how this manifests in other eras. This is from photographer Diana Solis, whose archive I worked on for a bit. Latino Youth High School and Alternative High School. And if you can see on the table where these young girls were all smoking cigarettes, being feminists, they're looking at the very first bilingual iteration of Our Bodies, Ourselves when it first came out. So I am interested in the act of rebellion, but also the demands of those who are rebelling and asking for more. Samira Rivera says, imagine how many young kids came and didn't think that their history and culture was valuable because they didn't see it represented here. These young people went to the Chicago History Museum. They saw a single lowrider in front of the displays and walked around the museum and noticed no other representation of them or of any Latinx people at all in the Chicago History Museum. And so they started protesting. And I got called up because I work on some history, and I got to meet with them, and I got to find out about what it is that they wanted, which was actually very visible on their signs. The curriculum they were demanding is on the sign. And as a result of their marching and protests, the first Chicago History Museum exhibition focused on the history of Latinx people in Chicago is up right now. It took all these years to get it together, but it's pretty massive and comprehensive, and I really want to suggest people go check it out if they can. So I'm interested in the results. I'm also interested in young people sort of curating their existence and the brilliance of that. This is a picture I found in the Lynn Bloom High School yearbook, senior picture, taken at this wall of truth that was right across from the Wall of Respect, which many more people probably have heard of, the first recorded community-based mural in the nation, right, at 27th and Langley, which has since gone. But across the street from it was this Wall of Truth, which has a photo mural wall where people were rotating photos. And it was constantly in rotation. And I found this photo, and I sent it to an historian who works on the Wall of Truth and Wall of Respect, who said, I've never seen this picture. So there's so much like youth cultural production and work still yet to be talked about and thought about. Also, I think they made their own outfits. It's just the best photo. It makes me feel very good about everything. But I try to bring as much as I can into my classroom and try to figure out how I can make the things that we're doing in the classroom relevant. And at the same time, I was just probably, 2019, during this teacher strike, I was thinking about how can I make my work move quicker? How can I take it to the street? And I tried to do rapid response ceramics, and it took weeks. It's not really great. But I did end up getting 4 people who are union reps during the strike to get these cups and take them into the union meetings, which I guess created quite a stir. But really what ended up doing things was, and I'm going to talk about these turning points in my the way that I work, was this era with 2-sided marching posters. And I think actually David took one of these pictures. Thank you, David. I started working with Hoofprint Studio, Chicago Act Collective, and Just Seeds Artist Co-op, and started to produce work and circulate work that way. And to backtrack a tiny bit, the way that I started to work was inspired by the young people I taught. I was working in area high schools, taking these histories that I was finding about youth rebellion and taking it directly to them and saying, what do you think about it? What do you think it means? And there's some of their collage where I would take things that I found in archives and bring them to the classroom. And that influenced the way I work. So just to kind of lay out a frame for the way that I work. I also have more recently stopped thinking about my work being aimed at galleries. I like to think about how fast I can get my work in front of the most eyes. And I drew this drawing for the most recent Chicago mayoral election, and just the way that it showed up all over on social media. I don't know if my work in galleries or museums has ever been seen this much, but I thought it was an effective way. But sometimes the baloney is in the studio, and sometimes the baloney is in the street. So it doesn't matter. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it doesn't work out. There's just a couple of examples. The big turning points for me that I wanted to outline for you are, I started doing archival research. I started to hear about these histories, and I wanted to know what sort of materials were collected in the archives. And I started banging my head against a wall, trying to find some of these, chronically mislabeled or difficult to find materials inside of these collections, primarily the Chicago History Museum, the Newberry, University of Illinois, Chicago, Harold Washington Library, and the Chicago Public Library Special Collections were the archives where I was looking first. And some of the things I found, they weren't what I was looking for, but they were fascinating to me. I'm very interested in popular music history, and I started to find like sort of little traces of like historic house music parties. I found, the Black Pea Stone Rangers had a band. I had no idea. Very interesting, particularly to the South Side history. And so working in the archives started to really, it was nothing I ever thought I would do, but what pushed me to do it was questions that I had about neighborhood history. The other turning point for me was starting to work with the folks at Hoofprint Studio. I thought that I could just be a self-contained, working in my own studio kind of a person, and then working with them meant that I have one image, right, a two-color image. I printed 150 different colorways in one day with them. Like it melted my brain, like it was the most exciting thing I'd ever done. And I thought, well, I've been trying to do this by myself. And so that has led to some contemporary work I've done over at the University of Michigan. That massive wall in the background, that's all prints that I worked on and that was produced by the folks at Hoofprint, based on archival research, right? This is where it all kind of comes together. I made a print about Eastern Michigan University, where I went for undergrad, where they had this incredible Chicano student movement that hadn't been written about, that people hadn't worked on, but I found some material about it in somebody's personal archive. There's a little lecture to EMU at the bottom saying, y'all should really do more about this. And then I was commissioned to make a print for the Raza Arts and Media Collective, which was this Chicano artist activist group that was on campus in the 70s. And so that's kind of where I am right now in terms of print, working in archives, doing oral histories, and producing work to educate, right? It's very focused on getting the work into the hands of teachers. In fact, I sell work at a massive discount to teachers, so if anybody's interested, I'll be selling work at Grabadolandia, National Museum of Mexican Art, on Sunday in town for that massive print fair, if people are interested. So one of the things that happened was accumulation. I start going to these archives, I start finding things I'm not looking for, I start documenting everything that even piques my interest. And I mean, we're artists, right? Our specialty is noticing things, right? You can say your specialty is ceramics, you can say it's print or this or that, but what we're really attuned to do is to pay attention and to see when something needs doing. And it was probably 6 months to a year in before I noticed that I had all these pictures of the front pages of newspapers that were covering Spanish language neighborhoods or Latinx neighborhoods, the news. And there's no list of any of these anywhere. So it was just a practical decision that I made to kind of gather these together and put them on a single poster. I thought, well, this is going to help the next researcher that came around. And by the time I had finished editioning the front page, I had found 4 more. So I don't have a picture of it, but they're on the back. That's not really the way you're supposed to do it. So then I had to re-edition it. And this one has probably 25 more mastheads. But it just kept being so striking to me that this history wasn't accumulated or gathered anyplace. There wasn't there's the Black Metropolis Research Center out of University of Chicago, and it's basically a list of where you can find things. And I thought, man, that's the best. In fact, a lot of the history I'm finding, I found there and through their networking and organizing in archives. But so I was basically putting out fishing lines to try to find the historians to do these things. I was like, it'd be great if you could maybe start on this. I'm not an historian. I just kind of work around history. But turning point 3 was realizing all of my neighborhood was the archive or the library. I wasn't finding things in the formal archives. It was because it was in the neighborhood. The people knew what was going on. And the people were like the texts inside the library. And this is me talking to Mr. Big and Pete Rodriguez, my neighbors, about something that I found out about. from hanging out with them, hanging out as methodology, right? And I'm going to whiz through it real quick, but I'm going to tell you some of the things that they told me about. It starts out with the story of these two schools, Harrison High School, which right now is at the corner of, it's if you're ever near Cook County Jail, it's like about 2 blocks away from there by California and 25th. And then the middle school branch of the same school, which was at 21st and Damon. Now, I lived at 21st Place in Hoyne, not to be too Chicago-y, but that's like 2 blocks away. And I had never heard of this school, much less of this massive rebellion that happened there. And to make matters weirder, Harrison High School was in an elementary school, and both my kids went there at the time when I found out about this. And so I was like gripped by this story. So the story is that in 1968, students were demanding college prep. They were demanding more homework, believe it or not. That was on their list of 10 demands. Yeah, and they were demanding classes that had something to do with their histories. This is a picture I found on eBay. This is where I was just Googling things, and eBay pictures were popping up. And this is the police attacking students in the lunchroom where my children eat at the time. And the students, the Black and the Latinx students, are getting together to make a coalition around their shared demands and their independent demands. Like, this is top-level organizing for high school students, pre-internet. I actually talked to the guy in the far corner who's falling down next to the guy with the sunglasses. I said to him, "Oh my God, you were there." He's like, "That's me falling off the counter in the lunchroom." And I said, "What about that G-man?" He was like, No, they were just trying to act cool. We weren't G-men. Because at the time, the Red Squad, the secret arm of the Chicago police, were infiltrating movements and posing as students. And had indeed infiltrated this movement. The Red Squad files are at Chicago History Museum if you're ever interested. So I started digging around, and in the archives of the Chicago Tribune and the Sun-Times, I started to find out this was a massive movement, and that the centerpiece of this movement was this Harrison High School. And I started to notice over time, sorry, that jogged a number, that's 1968, that these boycotts started in September, every Monday. And they were aligned with some labor movements that were doing every Monday strikes where they were walking around down by the Federal Building and marching. And then I figured out over time that the leaders of these movements within Harrison High School, that were organizing from Harrison High School, were part of this youth arm of the Black Panthers, which were called the New Breed. And the leader of that was Sharon Matthews. It took me a while to figure out she was the leader, but I found a negative from somebody in France on eBay. And then I saw in an exhibition from an actual historian the other picture. But it's sort of nice to see them in mid-air stomping. The students marched all the way from 21st in California all the way downtown to the Federal Building in 1968. So that's a long walk. And I asked them, and they said, yeah, you had to bring a little Tupperware, and you had to wear good shoes. That's miles, y'all. And then I'm looking at these pictures, and they had a Chicago thing they do is they make a coffin, a sculpture of a coffin, and then they write the thing on it, and then they smash it. And they march around with it. So this one, it said education on the side, and then they were destroying it. And dressed as Grim Reapers, you might see. This is like awesome performance art. But then I noticed this woman standing at the top of the photo holding a briefcase, and I thought, she kind of looks like she's in charge, right? It was Sharon. I found her yearbook at the Chicago History Museum in the archives, and she wasn't anywhere in the yearbook except for at the very end. And that's her sitting with Salvador Obregon, who was delivering his demands for the organization he was representing, the United Latins. And then there's Sharon delivering the New Breed demands. So I didn't know what else to do about it except I made a print because I found this picture of her in the newspaper. And I thought that she had to have been in charge because they were harassing her and arresting her. And she seemed like she also was in a couple magazines, a couple pages of coverage just about her in Jet magazine. And I'll tell you what, everybody in here, art works because I walked into an exhibition, and there she was posing in front of my print, and I met her. I got to talk to this incredible human who for a while was like, why do you want to know? I was like, oh my God, you organized a 60,000 person walkout before the internet. Like, where was the mimeograph machine? Like, how did you do this? How were the soles of your shoes? Like, were you scared with the Red Squad tapping your phone? She was like, yeah, they were tapping my phone. She's incredible. She actually, they didn't graduate her on time from high school. She had to go to the YMCA to finish her credits, went directly to Harvard, now works for the state of Illinois. Like, she's incredible. When I walked into the exhibition space, she was holding court and talking, and everyone was gathered around her. I was like, she's everything I thought she would be. And so I've done several hours of interviews with her in order to get this work to some of these historians who are trying to move this forward. And meanwhile, she continues to send me Facebook messages about what's happening in politics, and it's just incredible to have somebody who's been organizing this city for this long giving me advice. So the middle school that was a block from my house is also of interest to me, primarily because it was almost entirely ninth graders, and there was a massive rebellion here too. Like, the scale of the rebellion, I can't even really explain to you. This is them walking downtown, and you can tell the year because Lady Sings the Blues with Billy D. Yeah, it was Billy D. Williams in it, had just come out, and this actually didn't appear in the newspaper. It was a newspaper photo I found on eBay, but on the back it said that, it had a couple keywords, and I was searching the keywords that the newspapers were using, like Mexicans and protest and marches. And it has the sign, I oppose a generation of coconuts. Brown on the outside, white on the inside. So these young people wanted ethnic studies too, right? And this was actually Mexican and Puerto Rican students were at this middle school. Kind of an incredible use of the term coconuts. I've heard it used differently. But their rebellion was massive as well. And I found this picture and eventually brought it to the high school students that I was working with. And I said, hey, everybody at Benito Juarez, hey, did you know how your school got formed? And they said they didn't know. And I was like, I think it might be this, but I didn't know. I just started finding these things on eBay, going into archives, assembling the pictures, coming into their classroom, and figuring out what they wanted to know. And of course, what they wanted to know was, who is she? How did she end up in this sandwich of riot cops in front of the school? And so we started to work on that. They would kind of give me assignments, and I would go out in the world and work on it. I worked at Benito Juarez with the students, kind of leading the questioning, and me doing the investigating, like a librarian for them for about 4 years. I also was talking to people in the neighborhood. So I found this photo that appeared in the Baltimore Sun, I think, on eBay. And then I talked to somebody in the neighborhood, Mr. Big. This is us at Casa del Pueblo, where he holds court, by the way. Rest in peace, he held court. And he told me, oh yeah, this is because people were throwing cinder blocks off the roof of the building, and it hit this police officer who went up the side of the fire escape to try to drag all the students off the roof. And I said, oh my God, that sounds incredibly dangerous and violent. And he goes, well, the guy was okay. He sat in his car for 2 hours with air conditioning waiting for the photographers to get there, and then they staged this. And I've heard that from 3 people. Anyway, but I mean, I'm sure it did hurt. But then this picture recently has emerged, and someone sent it to me. It is precious. This is 9th grade. It's still 9th grade, including the F-bombs. I'm so proud of them. And this was the march the same day for the walkout. And so this, of course, didn't make it into the Sun-Times, right, because of the swearing. But all the people in this picture can be identified by people in the neighborhood. And also because of us sort of talking about it, making art about it, prompting people to care about this little bit of history, this kind of incredible Chicano history here in the Midwest, and Mexican and Latinx history here in the Midwest, that when this picture popped up in this 10 billion photo archive that was turned over to the Chicago History Museum, someone called me and sent it to me. So lucky me. I got a first peep at it. In addition to these things that have started to be unearthed, this person, Ray Patlan, who there's a retrospective of his work, also rest in peace, he recently passed. He was an artist in Chicago and painted the first murals at the Casa Aztlán. He was also a brown beret, and here's a picture he took of another brown beret making a film in front of Froebel of students and parents protesting, asking for ethnic studies, even earlier than the uprising that happened there in '73. So sort of priming the pump, getting it out there, creating art that's going to circulate actually brought a ton more information to me and more people that said they wanted to talk. When I first started asking people hung up on me, people said, very suspicious. And it made me realize that people were harassed by people in the Red Squad. The harassment by the secret wing of the police was really very severe. And I want to bring it back to the fact that people were fighting for ethnic studies. They wanted to learn about the history of their people. And so all this time I'm working with young people at Benito Juarez, right? And it took me 2 years to find a picture of Froebel, this massive building that had been at the corner of 21st and Damon, right? That's really close to the National Museum of Mexican Art. Behind it, you can see there's these low-rise affordable housing units that have been built there. But this school was incredibly big. How could there be demolition permits? You can't demolish a building without a permit in Chicago. That's never going to happen. So how come I couldn't find it? It took me 2 years, and then I found this one photo from 1943. People were ashamed of this building. People went to school in this building, and it was the most dilapidated, actually physically oldest structure in Chicago public schools at the time. People said you could see outside, that on the top floor where the gym was, that the ball for basketball would roll into the middle of the floor because it was like a kind of a cup. So we were trying to figure out what it would look like, and the students went there at night and stood in the road, which is a little terrifying, but tried to get a photo of what it would look like if they could see the school where it had stood. And we talked about decolonizing methodologies. I went to the archives and I hunted for a bunch of pictures. I made piles of Xeroxes of them and brought them to the students, and they made sense of it for me. I don't know, I'm not here to digest the history and say what it all means necessarily, but I want to be there and question it with them. And this was the very first day of them making collage. And needless to say, after this, I was like, let's do a lot more of this. In some cases, they were asking questions. In some cases, they were trying to retell the narrative. And then I also just ended up opening up my big, huge digital files to the graduate students I was working with at the Art Institute. And one student, he was a graphic designer, and so he went through the yearbook and made fake student IDs, a fake diploma, all these documents. He made sort of a Fluxus box, library cards, die-cut tostada sales, and put it all in this box. And he has one that's at Chicago History Museum, one that's at the Newberry now in their collection. And he brought it in to the high school students I was working with, and he says to them, hey, check these out, look at these IDs, I made them. And then I interviewed some of the people and put the interview on the back, and they said to him, are you a counterfeiter? And I said, that is the highest form of flattery. And then something else happened. They digitized this incredible documentary called Mi Raza, Portrait of a Family, that was made in 1973, around the time of this thing that happened at Froebel. And two of the children in the family actually went to Froebel. And it just so happens that one of them looks exactly like she looked in 1973. And that documentary came out, and a friend of mine said, I think I know her. Her hair is exactly the same. And it turns out she was there the day of the big event. Her mom said, why don't you go home and get the juice and some cups, and you can bring it to the protesters. And when she came back, like 100 riot cops were showing up. And somebody pushed her on the ground. She dropped her cups and her juice, and they saved her from getting beat up by the riot cops. But she did tell me that some of the parents that were marching in front of the school were beaten so badly that they couldn't walk or work again and had to go back to Mexico. And here she is telling the students that were making the artwork about it. So the power of actually having firsthand witnesses come in and talk to students about what they had seen and what it was like for them was beyond anything that could happen if I had written a book. And around the same time, we were having students kind of look at their own lives and make artwork about it. We'd planned for this little 1-week project where everyone would make a self-portrait, but of their house, right? And talk about scale. These are like two little 2-inch houses. But this was the first day. And as soon as I lined them up, I was like, oh my God, this is a great project. This is not just a 1-week project. And the amount of attention and care and love that each student put into these homes was incredible. They ended up making about 225 of them. And over time, the city kept getting bigger and bigger. And it only started because I had a bag of clay that just got too hard and I couldn't do anything else with it. So I chopped it into little bricks and it happened to be house shaped. And then it kind of just came out of that. But some of the stories that happened were people were making these places and then they would close, or they would be pushed out of their own homes by the time the piece came out of the kiln. And it just kind of gave us a reality check about the speed of the developers and gentrification. This exhibition it's this collection of work traveled to Chicago Jane Addams Hull House Museum, where it was shown with this turn-of-the-century pottery that was made in the Jane Addams Hull House factories by immigrant hands, creating an over 100-year timeline of Latinx ceramics in Chicago. And if you want to see all of them, the Chicago History Museum just acquired the entire collection and have them on exhibition at the Aki in Chicago show I was just talking about a second ago. So my interest in housing also includes people being able to find ways to stay in the neighborhood. And so for a little while I worked with PICO, the Pilsen Housing Cooperative. This is actually a drawing I would work on in between classes during the pandemic when I was teaching a million classes. And then I would go and cry and do a little drawing. It took like a year to finish. But what I was working on with them was, maybe if you've been to the National Museum of Mexican Art, kitty corner to it is this massive new mural for PICO, the co-op. And so I made a tiny house myself. At this point, I was dying to make a tiny house because I had talked to so many other people, students making tiny houses. And so I made a replica of that building. And then I made a replica of the whole block. And then I made a replica of a building near there. And then I put the tiny neighborhood in that building with a solar light. And so now when the little kids get out of their soccer games and baseball games, they can walk over and press their noses against this glass and see a little tiny neighborhood. The magic of clay is something I've been trying to run away from. I can't. It's like being in love. Like you can be talking to someone and you're just thinking about the clay and you're supposed to be engaged and paying attention, but it's hard because clay is sort of an all-in thing. And I'm going to talk more about clay tomorrow during my demonstration if people are around. And this is a piece that is no more. It was at the National Museum of Mexican Art, but somebody was doing some horseplay in the museum and knocked it off the wall and it shattered into 10,000 pieces. But whoever hit it got hurt because it has a bunch of porcupine quills in its hat. It's a portrait of Salvador Jimenez, who's now, coincidentally, the head of ceramics at the Art Institute of Chicago, School of the Art Institute. But I love making sculptures of people. And I was thinking about the afterlife. Somebody asked me, what do you want to take with you to the afterlife for an exhibition at the National Museum of Mexican Art about the Day of the Dead? And I thought, I just want to take the sound of everybody's voices with me. And I challenged myself to make a piece in 6 hours. And I sat down and I just made it. I still like making portraits of people, and then I collect them over long periods of time. This is the rebel youth that was me, that is my cousin, that is a bunch of us. I met these young people that were protesting the cops when I was first moved to Chicago, and I'm still so impressed with the strength of their message and the power of their protests. And then here's a 2005 self-portrait. I recently gathered a bunch of this work together. I'm just going to talk for like 2 more minutes. I recently gathered all this work together for an exhibition at the Institute for Humanities at the University of Michigan, along with the print. And it was my first time like really layering the print and the sculpture, and taking it and putting it all together as sort of a love letter to my neighborhood. All these people in the sculptures are people in the neighborhood that I had met. And it became like weaving a sort of a story. And it also became a job talk. I gave the talk and didn't realize it was turning into a conversation with people that I would then apply to for a job to. And then it also gave me an opportunity to show stuff that I had worked on like that week. So behind this figure, you can see there's like ads for Spanish language newspaper, Spanish language movies. And so I started getting really excited about these neighborhood newspapers. This was sort of one of my side missions. Is that what the young people call it? Like it was just in addition to the other projects I was working on. I have like this real project where I'm working on the history of Froebel and Harrison. And then I was like, these plastic cover ads are amazing. What? Look at all these. You get a discount if you're a student on your abortion? What was the 70s, you know? And then I was like, on the same page, there was these weird feet and then these animal feet. I just couldn't get enough of these. There was so much art in it, and the way that they're printed and the textures are just incredible. I like to say I'm going on a drift, you know? I'm just sort of drifting through the archives to see what I bump into. My favorite was El Informador. If you're ever near the Daily Library in Chicago, at University of Illinois, Chicago, please go. That's where I found these ads for Spanish language movies. I just couldn't get enough. I want to make t-shirts of every single one of them. They're incredible, but they're also from the 50s. So what were they doing in 1970s newspapers? So you have 1970s American films with Spanish subtitles next to 1950s Mexican films, and at night they showed porn. What was up with that? Like the 70s were just, you can't even believe they ever happened. And then I started to map out where these theaters were to kind of figure out where the Spanish language populations were, and they weren't where people say they are. There was a whole lot of other people, a whole lot of other communities that maybe we've lost track of. And in my final little bits, I want to say that there was some very interesting films about women. Some of these films I've looked up on YouTube, and they are racy, like to the point where I heard that there was a new administration in Mexico that came into power, and they gathered up a lot of these movies and put them in a warehouse, and it just lit on fire. They don't know what happened. But some of the stuff, I was like, okay, I can't watch this with my kids. Like, it's too much. Like, there's some really disturbing stuff. But it's exciting. You should watch them all. Also, like the sort of, liberated women, what's going to happen? They're dangerous. Satanic pandemonium. And then, of course, we're slipping into darkness here because of this women's liberation. That's like an entire thread. I could make a ton of work about that. But I ended up taking a whole bunch of these ads and printing them with an offset printer and making a newspaper out of it. And I have a big stack of them I'm going to give out for free. If you mention that you were here and you come by at Grabado Landia, I'm happy to share them with you. Thanks. Is this Q&A?
Yeah. I know we're getting pretty close to 12 o'clock, but we probably have a couple minutes for a few questions.
Really appreciate the talk here. One question I have is, you talked about, like, for instance, the Sun-Times archive, and that's stuff that didn't make it into the newspaper. What did make it in the newspaper, especially in context of it's 1968, you had all the various events. Prior to that, you had the, most recently you had the, just the prior month, you had the Democratic National Convention, stuff going on. What did make it into the Sun-Times? I guess I didn't see that in your presentation. Like, what was in the press the local press about this event happening there?
Well, the motherlode of stuff was in this journal called the Chicago Today. And I found the microfilm, just anybody can walk up and take it, back in the old microfilm Chicago Public Library, the way they used to have it arranged before it was put behind a desk. That's where I found the majority of the writing about it. But, the Tribune had a little tiny bit, they were like turmoil at school, students make demands. And there's, that's where the little article about Sharon being arrested I found was in the Tribune PDFs. But it was not very much. And it wasn't the real story. But also, if you're like, wow, this is radical, and you're reading about it at the Tribune, there's a lot more.
So what my question is like, have you gone and dug into the decision-making process that happened at those news desks of why is this being reported?
I can only guess why. There was a lot more recording than there was publishing and producing articles about, yeah. And I think that probably it had to do with the fact that there was a lot more stuff happening at the same time around because if this is happening like in October, right after the Democratic National Convention, then there's a lot of stuff that is happening simultaneously. It was the Chicago 7 took most of the headlines around that time, the trials. But there was a little bit here and there. There was a little bit in the Sun-Times. There was a lot more photos taken than would ever have been produced in newspapers. But they all are at Chicago History Museum right now, luckily. Don't know why.
We're right back here, Nicole.
Oh, all right.
I just wanted to know how you felt like La Raza means today versus kind of like the origins of it and like the ways it kind of has transformed today's youth versus like what it meant originally, like most things do.
Yeah, the funny thing is the folks that started this Raza Arts and Media Collective in Ann Arbor wrote articles about it right away because they were grad students, so they were like, oh no, let's have the article first, then we're going to come out as an organization. And they were Puerto Rican. So they were talking about the people, right, which is the direct translation, the race, right? But it's like all of the people. And one of the things I noticed about Harrison High School and Froebel is any time where there were Black and Mexicans organizing together, there would be clearer divisions, except for when there was Puerto Rican students around. And the Puerto Rican students would be in both of the organizations and would bring people together, and that's when work got done. It's not a hypothesis. I just want to notice the correlation at this point. But there's a lot more work to be done on that. But yeah, I don't know. I try to use the language about an era from the era as often as possible, because it's important to kind of get back to what the original founders were thinking about. But in the case of Chicago, particularly around Latinx organizing, we have Puerto Ricans and Mexicans. We never had a real big Chicano movement. Puerto Rican movements often had Chicanos mixed in and other folks at the same time. So yeah, it's dicey here. It's different. A bunch of people were at the Chicano organizing conference in Denver, and apparently Corky Gonzalez said, hey, everybody go out and do your march. Chicago, you stay in this basement until you're done getting your shit together because you guys are not being nice to each other. Because there was fighting. Because it was like a mixed group of people. Anyway.
We have enough time for 2 more questions.
And there's somebody over there with a question.
Hi, I just want to say thank you. As a Chicana artist, it really means so much to me that you share this information. I just want to ask you, how do you feel the difference on like the art aspect of like us Chicanos spreading awareness of what's going on? Because I know with this political things that's going on right now, it's kind of similar to what has happened around like the 1970s. So I just want to see like how do you view like the difference, how Chicano artists spread their awareness towards that?
Well, the Raza Arts and Media Collective made zines. There's some of the earliest zines that I found made by artists, even though there was just this big exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum about artist-made zines. But they weren't part of it because they were still, like, their archives hadn't really been turned over or looked at. I think that we should be studying these movements. That's why I talk about this stuff. I think that we should be looking at tactics, at ways of working together, at ways of thinking about ourselves and our relationships to each other. Like, how do we, foster interdependence amongst ourselves? How do we think about coalition building, honestly, in order to survive? Honestly, the stakes are very high right now, and also ethnic studies are definitely the target, again. And yeah, what's happening at the Smithsonian African American History Museum is evidence that this is still in the sights of those that would like to erase certain groups of people. So yeah, look at it as whatever you can do in your immediate area, what you can do for yourself and your people around you, and then, after that, look at the big picture. But yeah, make art. Don't stop making art. Art is not a side gig. It is the gig. Thank you for asking.
What are your strategies for dealing with gaps in the archives?
It's all gaps. And then all the racist nomenclature, like I had to dig and dig. I also found a lot of stuff in the African American history, or African American archives, because often that is just non-white archives because of the, incredible, God, the long-term racism and in the fields and archive workers, and I don't know. I would say my strategy is that's what art's for. I was told very early on then, history, this is the known history, and the space in between is the unknown history, and that's where artists are. That's where we're supposed to be. Speculative, yes. And also life-affirming, yes, but also aspirational. What do we want? When do we want it? You know the answer. Yeah, fill it in, talk to people. I just talked about 5 people that passed away. None of their histories were in the archive. I start rabble-rousing about it, it gets in, right? Go directly to the archives and complain. Sit there, bother them. My methodology is be present, hassle them. It worked. Guess what? I'm on the advisory for that IKEA in Chicago exhibition. That was one way to get me to stop talking. But also they were like, what can we do? There's a lot of gaps. It's all gaps. It's all missing. There's all this missing stuff. But let it give you energy. Let your frustration charge your art and make you make more.
Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thanks for having me, everybody. Thanks for coming.